managed to pick some crab apples, and I've just noticed there's this big field, which is normally an arable field. You can see they've got some grass popping up here, but I think this was wheat previously. But you can see they've got this cover crop, which is mustard. And sorry, excuse my nails, Rosie did that for me. And this is a cover crop, and we're in the shade here, so I don't know if it's got any pollinators on it, but it should be really good for pollinators. So it's like a green manure, so it'll just protect the soil. But yeah, it's nice to see. Big old hoverfly there enjoying the nectar, and I can see a wasp over there. Be interesting to see what else is feasting off this. Large oak tree, and I can hear quite a few birds up in the canopy just helping themselves to the acorns. But I've also noticed that down here there's a lot of really lovely acorns ready to germinate. You can see there how it's split, and I've even got one, I found one here with a little tiny root coming out. But it's really good to get ones which are on the way to germinating. They obviously, do so much better than trying to grow them yourself. So I'm going to gently gather up. When they've got that little, they start to split at the ends. It's a really good sign that they will germinate well. And so I'm going to collect up some of these and take them back so I can plant them. The crab apples from down by the village hall, and I'm just going to do this first part of making some crab apple jelly. I like making preserves, but I must admit I prefer making jelly to jam, just because with jams you have to worry a bit about pectin levels and all that sort of stuff, and also you have to kind of cook the fruit thoroughly first, and it's just a bit more complicated. I know when I first started making preserves, which was back when I was in my teens, I the whole idea of a jelly bag was like, what even is that? But I actually find making jellies really simple and straightforward, because you always use apples as a base, and because you're using the whole of the apple, so you just cut up the whole thing and boil it until it's... Neddy, what are you eating? Because you use the whole of the apple, and it's the pips and the those kind of like husky bits around the pips and the skin and the bit under the skin which has the most pectin, so it's kind of absolutely fail safe that you will get a set. I think they just look a little bit more sophisticated than jam, and as well as that, when you're using apples as a base, they produce an almost colourless jelly, so kind of anything you add to it is going to sort of have some give it a nice sort of hue. So you don't really, you don't need a huge amount of another fruit like brambles or mulberries or in this case crab apples, which will give it a beautiful pink kind of colour, in order to get a really pretty looking jelly. So you don't need to worry about using a particular type of apple as well. These are just, I think they're Golden Delicious off a tree in my garden, which actually, although it's a very prolific fruiter, they're not actually terribly tasty. So I tend to use them more in cooking. So leave the rabbit alone, Ned. So basically, with jelly, it's a two-stage process. So you boil up the fruit and get it to release all its juice, and then you drain it overnight through the jelly bag, which I'll show you, and then the following day you measure out the liquid and add a certain amount of sugar per volume of liquid, and then you boil it, and that's when you reach your setting point. So you don't have to worry about peeling and getting all the stuff out of. Sorry, Ned's learning that the rabbit lives in the bit just behind my kitchen here, and he wants to go and play with Rhubarb. Rhubarb doesn't seem quite so keen, but never mind. So it's a really easy way, and to make a preserve, and it's lovely because like I said, if you've been to a friend's and they've got a fruit tree, or fruit bushes rather, and you've got a few apples, it's much better because the jelly bag only has a small capacity. It's really easy to make small batches. Sorry. Ned, I'm just going to roughly chop the apples, just cut them in half and make sure there aren't any earwigs and stuff in there. If they are a bit manky, I just chuck them out for the chickens. Obviously, I think, like I said, you can use windfalls, or just any apples you've got hanging around. If you've got a fruit tree or you find a wilding, you can just use straight crab apples, but it's quite nice to dilute them a bit with regular apples, just because I actually find crab apples, because like I said, the pectin in, oh, you brought your bone in here, have you? Right, marvellous. Because the pectin is concentrated around the fruit and the pips, the skin and the pips, because obviously in this apple compared to a crab apple, there's absolutely masses of pectin in these. And I find that if I make pure crab apple jelly, it sets virtually as soon as I've put the sugar in the pan, and you barely have to boil it at all, which is kind of fine, but it can quite quickly go like, it sets so hard you can, and I like quite a soft set with jellies. But I'm just going to, that's enough there actually, and that one's been pecked by a bird. Just obviously give the crab apples a quick rinse, and also just sort of as you're popping them in, just make sure there aren't any which are sort of, really manky looking. Sorry, the dog has discovered the rabbit again. I've got the crab apples and the apples in this saucepan here, which I know will fit the amount which then fits in the jelly bag, which is this, and you just buy it in a kit. And then this, oh, lost the leg, found it. So you screw these into the ring like this, and then you suspend the jelly bag with the pulped fruit, into the over the jug, and then you let it drain overnight. So it sits on top of the jug like this, with the bag suspended down the middle, and then you, like I said, you put the pulp fruit. So you just want to cook it quite slowly. Obviously it's not, you're not trying to sort of boil it up at all. So just so that the fruit softens, and then you can mash it with a potato masher, just to sort of really break down all the fibres in the apples. And then, and then we sort of see the amount of liquid, and you use the amount of sugar proportional to the amount of liquid. So it doesn't really matter. You don't have to put too much water in it, otherwise it'll be, you have to be boiling it for ages, but you want enough so that there's actually a proper juice rather than a really thick kind of syrupy liquor. As I said, crab apples are absolutely full of pectin, and even when you feel it, you can feel the sort of gelatinous quality of the juice. So I just put water into kind of just below covering it. and just let it simmer on a sort of medium-low heat until the fruit is sort of really broken down and is nice and pulpy. I'm just scalding the jelly bag quickly, so I've popped it in the jug that I'm going to drain the pulp into. Just put a bit of boiling water on it. Fish it out. Then I'm just going to suspend it over the jug like that. And then it's just a question of filling it with the pulp. And you saw previously that I've mashed it with a potato masher, and I'll pop it into here and then I'll put it in the larder to keep the flies off it, just to and allow it to drain overnight. It's the following morning and it's bucketing rain outside, which is a bit bedraggled because I've just been out to do the chickens. So I've got my strained fruity pulp here, and you can see it's still slightly dripping, but that's okay. I'm going to put I've got the jars, just a little tray here, rattle rattle, and you can see I've got my jam funnel as well. I'm just going to pop those in on 100 degrees to just heat up and sterilise just while I'm doing the jam. So you need to heat the jars. I've got about 8 or 9 in there. It's always better to do too many because it's an absolute nightmare if you think you run out and think, oh no, because you have to sterilise them. So they have to be on 100 degrees for about sort of 10-15 minutes. I put them on for a little bit higher than that, but that's the basic. It's just to warm them up so they don't crack when you put in the hot jelly, and you know, to just sort of nuke any bugs that might be on the glass. Obviously wash them in hot soapy water first and then pop them in the oven just to heat up and sterilise. So hello Ned, got your antler, well done, drop that on the tiles, marvellous. So I've got my saucepan here. As you can see, it's not anything fancy. You do need a big vessel just because it does bubble up quite a lot. And the other thing, and I've got a spatula, I've got my ladle somewhere, and I'm going to measure out the liquid. I've got one of these, because I haven't got terribly good scales, so I'm going to measure it out using this, which has sort of got a calibrated thing for different kind of foodstuffs on it. So let me just get a plate to put the fruit pulp on. You can feed the fruit pulp back to your chickens if you got them, or just pop it out in the garden for wildlife to hoover up. So actually I'm just going to take my scarf off because it will get a bit fluffy. Excuse me. There we go, that's that. That will go for a wash. So there's quite a lot of liquid here. So basically what I need is, where's the liquid? Liquid here. I need 450 grams of sugar to every 600 ml of juice. I'll pop that in the description box down below. Where's my liquid? So that's 50, or 500 ml. Scrape it out. Every last scrap of precious juice, and as I said, you can kind of see that it's already quite a kind of syrupy, thick syrupy consistency. So that's 250, so that's about 750 ml of juice. So I just have to do a little bit of maths to work out how much sugar I need, excuse me. So for those proportions, for 750 ml of juice, I need, oh, guinea pigs are kicking off, 560 grams of sugar. So I've got the sugar one on here. What I'm going to do is put this on a low heat to just dissolve the sugar, and then once it's all clear, so that the crystals have broken down and it's all just dissolved into the liquid, I'll then crank the heat right up and boil it at what we call a rolling boil, which is basically a sort of pretty terrifying kind of volcanic thing. And I'll do that for, it probably needs about 10-12 minutes at that temperature. Basically it's your it's not really about a timing, it's more to do with the pectin levels and just the amount of water, the amount of sugar, and so it's a chemical reaction basically. So you just need to kind of watch it. And the other piece of equipment you need if you're making jams or jellies, you can use a jam thermometer, but I find them a bit rubbish, and also I broke mine. So what I use is a really cold saucer. I've got these ones from my tea set, which with cups that I've also broken, so they're spare. You're seeing a sort of theme here. Anyway, and I just keep them in the freezer. And the idea is that it, when you think you're coming up to setting point, and I'll show you a few different tricks for that. When you think you're coming up to setting point, you put a little blob onto the saucer, and then it'll set quite, obviously much more quickly than if you let it cool down naturally. And then you can just sort of see whether it's forming a set or not. So I keep those saucers in the freezer. But I'm going to just put this on a low heat, so sort of sort of 3 on my hob, and just then stir it while I let the sugar dissolve. You can see here there's not a huge amount of liquid. It's probably, where does that come up to on the spoon? Maybe less than an inch. But don't be tempted to think you can kind of get away with a smaller saucepan, so which you'll see once it really starts to bubble. But I'm just going to, you can see it's already kind of really quite thick and syrupy, so I'm just going to let this gently come up to heat. I don't really want it to kind of really start bubbling yet, because I need to just let the sugar dissolve into the liquid. You can see most of the sugar crystals have dissolved now. It's going nice and clear. So I'll just check. Yeah, so once that's happened, oh, it smells lovely. Once that's happened, you can then crank the heat up to higher, not full. I mean, I'm not brave enough to put it on top whack, but you do need to get it up to, a sort of a high temperature. So turn it up, and then I'll show you what it looks like when it's properly boiling. Starting to come up the boil now. You see all that froth on top. Now, people can get quite exercised about this, but personally I don't worry too much about it. It's basically just a kind of, because you're using like natural ingredients, you tend to get a bit of scum on there, but I'll show you what to do with that later. So I'm just going to let it come up to a proper old rolling boil, as we call it. As I said, I've got it on 5 rather than 6 because I don't want it to burn, so it's finding that balance between bringing up to a good steady heat. That's why you're meant to use a proper like preserving pan, but the trouble is preserving pans are huge, and it just doesn't really justify it sort of, for such a small quantity. You tend to ironically get a more uneven response, so I just use this big kind of casserole pot, stainless steel casserole pot that I've got. So here we are, we're coming up to a boil. So I'm going to set the timer now for about 10 minutes and then I'll check it after that. I will keep a bit of an eye on it. You can kind of tell, so I'll see if I can, I'll endeavour to film when it sort of starts looking like it's gone to jelly, but yeah, just at the moment. So if I dip my spoon in at the moment, it's still totally liquid. Can you see that? Oh, I didn't have that on camera. So it's still totally liquid and it just drips just like fruit juice. So I'll let that bubble away for 10 minutes. You're not really meant to kind of stir it, but I do give it a little sweep every so often just to make sure it isn't catching on the bottom. But like I said, if you've got a fairly even heat, it should be fine. One other thing I forgot to say when I was actually putting the juice into the saucepan, don't squeeze the jelly bag, otherwise you get a cloudy jelly, and really for the extra sort of teaspoonful of juice, it's not really worth it. So yeah, I'll just let this carry on bubbling. So this has had about 5 minutes, and you can see it's properly bubbling up now, and you can also see that it's going much kind of more, it's a much thicker, glossier. Can you see that glossy sort of shine on the spoon? So like I said, this had about 5 minutes, and so I'll keep an eye on it now. Again, you can see how much it's bubbling up, so I'm just going to keep an eye on it now. It might not even need 10 minutes. Like I said, crab apples are absolutely jam full of pectin, so I'm just going to keep an eye on it from now on. You see, I'm not stirring it, but it just needs to bubble away like that for a few more minutes, and then I'll take it off the heat and try it for set. So you can see if I just let it sit in the spoon for a bit, literally a few seconds, you can see it's just started to skin up now, nearly there, and it's not even had 10 minutes yet. So I've taken it off the heat because obviously if it is at setting point, I don't want it to get too gelatinous, and I'm just going to pour a little bit on there. It is starting to, you can see it's starting to flake up now. That's called the flake test because it kind of falls in flakes off the spoon. So I'm just going to leave this for a second. Oh, you can't really see it. I said that it makes quite a colourless liquid, or colourless jelly. So I'm just going to leave it for a second. And it's just, oh, I don't know if you can see this. Can you just see? It's just starting to go a bit gloopy, and it's not just a thick syrup, it's actually sort of gelatinous. But I'm going to give it a couple more minutes because it's nearly there, just not quite. So pop it back on the heat and let it bubble up for a couple more minutes. There we go. So when you get a boil like this is kind of pretty much at setting point as well. You can see it's just a foam on the top. And if I dip my spoon in, leave it for a couple of seconds, can you see that sort of lumpy consistency? So I'm just going to test it, give it another 30 seconds, and then I'll test it again for set. Yeah, I can already see as it's sort of flaking off the spoon, so that has reached setting point, but I will just show you the saucer test. Sorry, the lighting's absolutely terrible, it's all gleamy. I've taken it off the heat and my jars are nicely cooked. So yes, this has taken about 10 minutes. So let it cool for a minute or so on the cold saucer. Can you see that skin? I think you can see that. Yeah. So that's ready to set. So I can now let it cool for a minute, then pop it in the jars. obviously you don't leave it too long or it'll set. You can see that it has reduced down a bit. There's a bit of scum, but I'll show you what to do with that. So I'm now going to get the jars out and bottle it up. I put a tea towel over the bit on the cooker because I'm absolutely going to slop it everywhere. It's better to assume I will. So there is a bit of scum on the top, so just push that out of the way as you transfer it into the jars. And then what I tend to do, some people sort of skim it all off, but I find that just ends up with an awful lot of skimmings. Just get the lids. You need to put the lids on obviously straight away, but just remember that of course everything is super hot, so just kind of put them on lightly to start with, and then you can tighten them up once you've done all of them, and you can wear an oven glove. So like I said, I don't bother skimming off the froth on the top. What I do is the last jar will be mainly froth, which doesn't sound very nice to eat, and indeed it isn't very nice to eat, but for cooking and you know, using in that kind of thing, it's completely fine, because of course it dissolves as soon as you put it in any sort of hot liquid. So I use jellies a lot in you know, gravies, casseroles, that kind of thing, for thickening. So they're not just for toast. Really, anywhere that you'd use red currant jelly, you can substitute any sort of fruity jelly. So as you can see, I'm only probably going to get 4, maybe 5 jars out of this. 4 actually. And it might seem an awful lot of faff just for 4 jars of jelly, but it's a really nice way, as I said, if you've got someone who's got fruit bushes and you've got a few apples, it's a really nice way to sort of memorialise that. They taste delicious as well, even if they are quite a lot of work. My bunny pigs, as I call them, live in the kitchen, or in the kind of boot room part of the kitchen, but I do put them out to graze every day. Now, as you can see, this time of year the grass doesn't grow particularly fast, and we tend to think of these little critters needing just grass, but actually they all sorts of kind of herbage, and rabbits especially they will eat nettles in small quantities. They love hogweed, which is this thing that Rhubarb's just tucking into. They like yarrow. There's a little bit of clover down there, and so actually having a kind of bit of a mixed sward. They don't sadly like creeping buttercup, which I've got an absolute, you know, carpet of in here, but anyway, or certainly over the other bits of the garden, but they don't you know, think they only like grass, and actually they get all sorts of different nutrients from the different types of plants. So I put my little chaps out pretty much every day unless it's bucketing with rain, and there you can see Rhubarb's just eating some nettles. He's eating the seeds actually, which are full of kind of omega-3 and, is it omega-3? Anyway, full of essential fatty acids, and so he's chowing down on the seeds of that nettle there, and then he'll eat this hogweed. So I'll come out and show you what it looks like once they've been in here for a few hours. There's Cherry, Winnie and Chop Chip there, and we'll just see where Piglet is. There she is. She's a little bit shy. I use the tops of old cat crate, you know, cat transport baskets as a bit of a shelter. There's their water, and here's their carry basket. And then what I will do is just pop this old duvet cover over the top of them so that they feel a little bit more secure from overhead predators, and also just so that when the chickens jump on here they don't poo on them. So I'm going to be making up some little like treats for them later using some plants I've got in the garden. But just for now, they're out here in the slightly cool, breezy weather, but it's not cold, and they'll chew out that grass for me and trim back the hogweed and the nettles, and I can go in and clean out their indoor place. Something you can do for your bunny pigs now that the weather's getting a little bit more changeable and they might not be able to go out and graze, is to make up some little kind of treats for them. Now I use cardboard loo roll inners, and I've gathered some bits from outside. So I've got some cherry leaves here, some hazel leaves, some grass, a bit of yarrow, and some dock, and I think there's some dandelion leaves in here as well. So have a look round. Obviously you need to be a little bit careful what you're giving them to eat, but they love apple leaves, twigs, willow, cherry, and then obviously dandelions, as most people know. You can also cut up things like cucumber, cabbage, not really lettuce, or they're not so good with spinach either, because it's got sort of it contains a substance which can make their upset their little systems a bit. But obviously they're meant to eat loads and loads of hay. So what I'm going to do is just pop some hay in this end, and then I will pop some of the herbage in this end like that, and then basically make a sort of herbage sandwich in the loo roll. That doesn't matter if they eat the cardboard, you don't really want them eating too much, but it doesn't do them any sort of harm. Obviously it's just kind of paper pulp. So you can give them these, and if you want to, you can dry some of these herbs because they'll still retain some goodness. And it's just about getting these lovely sort of long fibres into their systems, which is so important, because although carrots and apples and things like that are okay for them, really they should be eating all these kind of nice sort of roughagey things here. So by doing this, they kind of nibble through, or if they're anything like mine, they'll just pull out the hay, go straight to the treats, but you know, never mind. And I just find by doing this, it makes it, if you give them just things in their run, they tend to kind of tread all over them and things like that. But if you do it in the loo roll inners, then it sort of keeps it a little bit more contained, and just gives them a little bit of interest as well during the times when they can't go out in their run. So there we are, these little treats for your bunny pigs. That concludes the vlog. I hope you enjoyed it. So I will say goodbye from a very rainy and windy and rather horrible Sussex, and I'll look forward to seeing you next week.